Waiting on Scott to arrive here in a few minutes, and once he's in, we're gonna jump in, get right to questions, and change your life about what you think about creatine and protein. Awesome. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull in Scott right now. Scott is in Canada. I hope he's on the same time zone. If not, we may be early. Boom, there he is. What's up, Scott? Awesome, man. Here he comes. Thank you for your patience. Yo, hey, what's up, Scott?
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, it's going great, man. How's your day been so far?
Oh, fantastic. Yeah.
Oh, good, man. Dude, I'm so excited to have you on today, man. I know you're super busy, and I'm just pumped, man. You're the go-to guy when it comes to creatine, carbohydrate, caffeine, questions, even protein. So I'm glad that, I'm just really thankful for your time today.
You're welcome. Anytime.
Yeah, man. So we got like 15 questions from our community just for you about creatine, about protein. So what I want to do now is just take some time and first off, just have the group, even though they probably should know who you are, explain to them, hey, there's Annette. What's up, Annette? So explain to the group a little bit about who you are and what you studied and what you're doing today.
Okay. So yeah, I'm a professor at Brandon University in Brandon, Manitoba, Canada. I am in the Department of Physical Education. I do a lot of research in creatine and protein, primarily to enhance exercise performance, but both younger and older adults. And I've also looked at enhancing both muscle mass, but also the impacts on brain as well.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you did mention some like neurological type benefits from carbohydrate and caffeine consumption too. So those are some things I did not even mention throughout our post. So feel free to touch on anything about that. But I think those pieces about your exercise performance, fat loss, and gaining muscle mass in our population would be great. So thank you for taking time to explain that. What I'm gonna do right now, man, is just jump into some questions. And as you guys have questions, please, please comment on those. And out of respect for your time, Scott, what I want to do is maybe just break this up maybe for 30 minutes and just go over some questions and maybe have a part two if there's even more questions, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So here are some questions, Scott. You excited?
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Super.
Here we go. Yeah, I'm excited, man. So first question, really great question from Miss Kathleen Coleman in our group. Her question is, why creatine? What exactly does creatine do?
Okay, that's a great question. So first of all, creatine it's an amino acid. It's actually made up of 3 amino acids. So amino acids are the building blocks for protein. So if you have protein, for example, that's made up of 20 different amino acids. So creatine's just 3 of those amino acids that are formed together in a particular way. The benefit of creatine is that you can actually, most of the creatine that you ingest or that you produce within your body goes to your muscle. Some of it also goes to your brain as well. But it's important for this high intensity energy system. So anytime you're doing sprints, like a 5-second, 10-second sprint, or lifting weights, for example, you utilize predominantly this creatine phosphate energy system. So that's one reason why creatine supplementation is so beneficial, because it gets into your muscle and really helps that energy system out.
Hey, that is gold. You explained that so well, but that is so awesome. Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome.
That's just textbook level stuff. This really shows that you've published, like, how many papers have you published up to this point?
46. Yeah.
46. That is incredible. Anyway, that's incredible. Guys, so thank you, Scott, for that. And, I guess on a follow-up question for that, a lot of my female clients ask, should I be taking creatine? How would you
Yeah.
answer that for maybe a female who's starting the fat loss phase, brand new to creatine, and they're curious if
Yeah.
they should be taking it?
Yeah, well, definitely it's going to have a small effect. So there's things that have massive effects, like controlling your caloric intake, exercising regularly, sleep, those sorts of things. So it's not necessary to take creatine to achieve fat loss or to achieve gains in muscle mass. So I think that's important to note. But it can have a small effect. There is some evidence for that. So the studies that we've looked at, you gain about 1 kilogram or 1.2 kilograms more muscle mass over time when you took creatine and did resistance training versus just resistance training. So it works. And the other cool thing that we just published was you also lose about 0.5 kilogram more fat mass, again, over time when you took creatine and resistance trained versus those that just resistance trained.
That is incredible. Holy smoke. So more muscle, less fat, and just making sure, as Annette so clearly stated, those taking care of those sledgehammers first, those most important things such as calories and macros, and then getting to supplementation once it's needed. I love that. A lot of times people just come to me like, yo, what's the best supplement I can be taking? And they're not even adhering to a calorie goal. So I'm so glad you mentioned that. And another big, I love to ask you this question too. I'm being selfish, but what are maybe two of the biggest misconceptions that we hear in our industry about creatine?
The first is that it's a steroid. It's definitely not a steroid. Our bodies actually produce it. Our liver and our kidneys produce creatine. And it's important for that energy system as well. And then I'd say probably the other misconception, it's not exactly untrue, but people are always think that creatine is going to put on a lot of water weight and just make you bloated. And that is true. You will retain some water when you consume creatine as a supplement, and you might put on weight. But some of that weight is obviously going to be muscle mass, and you're actually going to be losing some fat mass while you take it. And the other thing that's important is that water retention actually stimulates the muscle to grow. So that's actually a good thing. So when you start to bring in that water, that actually stimulates a whole cascade of metabolic events that ultimately lead to muscle growth. So that's actually a good thing.
So cool.
So, yeah.
I never realized that. I never knew that was like a cascade of events through the muscle holding water. So that's so cool. Fantastic. And let's say last question before we kind of dive back into here is bloating is a main concern for people taking creatine. What recommendations do you have for someone who's maybe new to taking creatine or they've been taking it, and how would you help them work through that to reduce their bloating if they're taking creatine?
Yeah, I would just say take a lower dose. So there's a couple of dosing strategies. One is like traditionally the supplement companies would just suggest 5 days of loading where you take 20 grams and you just kind of overload your body for 5 days. You can take a low dose. So taking just 3 grams to 5 grams per day and doing that for 28 days can get the same amount of creatine into your muscle as doing that loading phase for 5 days and then a maintenance phase after that. So just take a lower dose and just be patient.
I love that. A lot of people think that loading is mandatory, but it's not. I love how you said, hey, take a smaller dose through a longer period of time, and you can get the same creatine saturation in your muscles as if you were loading it. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Cool. Hey, so another great question is let's switch gears a little bit. Oh, actually, let's stay on creatine for a second. We have a great question from Christy. She asks, when should creatine be consumed? On days that you lift hard, every day, only in a muscle building phase, and in regards to workout timing, when would it be best consumed?
Okay, that's a lot of questions.
I'm sorry, I'll start with one.
So cycling on and off creatine, that's one commonly asked question. And the science isn't actually that clear on whether you should do that or not. There hasn't been any studies that have ever looked at cycling on and off creatine versus just taking creatine continuously, and whether you can grow the same amount of muscle and achieve the same amount of strength gains. So there hasn't been any science to say whether you should cycle on or off. Some of the research that we've recently done is we've looked at whether you should take creatine before training or after training. And we've shown that if you take it after training, you actually get bigger muscles over time than if you took it before training. So there's only 3 studies out there, but they all support or tend to support that after is slightly better than before training.
I did not know that. I always assumed that timing wasn't relevant, and as long as you be consistent with that dose. So I'm glad to hear that's what research says, and I think that's influenced me, Scott, to start taking creatine, especially when there's just a slight advantage. Why not take advantage of it?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's obviously better to take it than to not take it.
Yeah.
But if you want to maximize the benefits, it seems like after might be better than before.
I love that. And so speaking of consuming creatine after a training session, in what ways do you recommend taking it?
So you can just mix it with water, but mixing it with a carbohydrate and or protein, because both protein and carbohydrates will stimulate insulin, and insulin will help the uptake of creatine.
Fantastic. Okay, so it sounds like preferably maybe a liquid with water or other carbohydrates and or protein to help shuttle that stuff into your muscles.
Absolutely.
Perfect. All right. Hey, another question from Nico. She asked, is HCl underdosed, and is it better than creatine monohydrate?
Yes. So there's a whole bunch of different types of creatine, and creatine monohydrate has been the most studied. So there's 500 plus studies on creatine monohydrate and exercise, and all these different other forms of creatine haven't been shown to be any better than creatine monohydrate. And even creatine HCl, from my knowledge, there's been very, very few studies, or I looked up yesterday, there was one study on creatine HCl versus creatine monohydrate, and they showed the same strength gains over time.
Wow, okay.
So it isn't any better than monohydrate, and typically monohydrate's cheaper and just more readily available. So, and again, there's better, stronger evidence to support that it actually works and it's very safe.
Yeah.
So I would say just stick with creatine monohydrate.
It's funny, a quick funny story. I was in high school and I was just getting into nutrition. And I'm like, I started working I was like 15, right? And this is kind of while I had anorexia and kind of going through my passion nutrition. And I just want to get huge. I wanted to gain muscle mass. I wanted to lose fat. And I was not, first of all, I wasn't hitting my calorie goal. I was running 10 miles a day, base training for cross country. So before work one day, I worked at a restaurant. I went to GNC next to the restaurant, and I go in there. I'm like, hey, and I was super quiet, and they're like, hey, what are you looking for? I'm like, I'm looking for some creatine. I'm like, looking for ways to help me grow some more muscle. And big old guy walks over to me. He's like, hey, let's start you on some creatine. Didn't even ask about calories or like protein,
For
creatine,
sure.
right? I'm like, I didn't know a thing about. I didn't know creatine existed. I'm like, great. And I see all these products of creatine, and I said, hey, so which one's the best to take? And he's like, hey, this one here. And what it was, my first ever creatine product I've ever taken, it was a creatine phosphate. I think the creatine like phosphagen or something, and I didn't know what I was doing, but it was like, yeah, man, like this is like the kind that's in all. I'm like, I didn't understand back then. Like, I don't know what you're talking about, but it's really crazy how there's just so much studies behind and support behind creatine monohydrate, and it's so cheap, it's effective, and what's really cool is like I think the bodybuilding industry and general population has branded creatine as like a big meathead type supplement, but it's great for general health too. So maybe tell us a little about some general health benefits of taking creatine besides fat loss, besides improvement in power and increases in muscle gain as well.
Yeah, so myself and Dr. Darren Kando have done multiple studies on creatine and resistance training in older adults, so typically over the age of 50. And we've shown that, again, it can enhance muscle, can enhance some tasks like sit to stand, for example, some functional tasks. We've also shown that it perhaps has some benefit on bone strength as well. So it can make their bones stronger. And there's also some evidence that it can enhance your cognition, your brain as well. So that's pretty cool. So lots of other benefits besides just kind of using it for bodybuilders to get jacked.
I love that. Wow, so a lot of different benefits. I love it. So it's just not something that can help you gain muscle and lose fat, but help with help with like glucose metabolism and brain function, as you mentioned, TBIs.
Yeah.
I like it. Chris, for you guys who don't know, I don't think anyone knows this except Annette, who is on this call too. I met Dr. Scott Forbes at the last ISSN conference in Las Vegas, and I'm like, yo, like, I was like, you're so cool, like, let's be friends, and like, we just talk shop all day. But anyway, that's how we met, in case you guys are curious. So let's jump on to the protein, Scott. A big question is, how much protein in one meal is too much?
So that's a great question. So the research has shown that if you take 1.6 grams per kilogram per day, that's sufficient to maximize muscle building, specifically in those that do resistance training. So there's a group from McMaster University, which is in Canada as well. So go Canadians. But yeah, Rob Morton was the PhD student at the time. He's a doctor now, but yeah, he did a study, big meta-analysis looking at how much protein do you need to maximize muscle in those that do resistance training. And it was 1.6 grams per kilogram per day. So basically the recommendation is if you have 4 meals in a day, for example, you would just divide 1.6 by 4. So you would take 0.4 grams per kilogram of protein per meal. So that's basically, you just need to figure out how many meals you're going to have in a day and take 1.6 and divide that by the number of meals.
Easy enough. I love how you kind of worked through that and said, hey, this is your total protein take. Split that up between each meal, and hey, there's your answer.
Yeah.
And what happens if we consume amount of protein over our body's needs? So whether either at, let's say, just start at our day's total. Let's say that we consume 3.5 grams per kilogram or even 5 grams per kilogram. What happens to excess protein that's not utilized?
So yeah, Jose Antonio has looked at high protein diets, and especially those that do resistance training as well. So you have to do exercise. But those that did a lot of exercise and consumed a high amount of protein, they actually, in one study, it actually helped them lose fat, even though they're consuming more calories and tons of excess protein. They were actually that helped them lose more fat. So we don't know exactly why that might happen. But overeating on protein doesn't seem to be that bad, especially with regards to weight gain and body composition. So what happens to that protein? You can use it as a fuel source. So just like you can break down carbohydrates or fats and use that to produce, it's called ATP within your muscle, or energy within your muscle, you can also break down protein as well and use it within your muscle.
Interesting. You know, I heard through a lot of things in our industry, people say if you eat too much protein in a meal, it's going to turn into fat. You're going to store fat. You're going to gain fat. So how would you respond to those types of people, like these types of questions or comments? And it's like, hey, if you eat too much of your body's needs, it's going to go to like straight body fat, and you're just going to get fat. How would you respond to that?
I would say that the science doesn't support that. So yeah, again, you need to just look at the science. And again, and those individuals that exercise, if you eat a lot of protein, they're not gaining fat. And in fact, perhaps it's actually doing the opposite to that, which is pretty wild. So again, that's what the science is supporting.
Yeah.
Some of those long-term studies that Jose Antonio has been doing. And it's showing that overeating on protein is, if anything, it's definitely not detrimental, and it can be beneficial.
Okay. I never understood to that degree. So I'm so glad you clarified that through research. I've always wanted that, Scott. So let's jump back on another question on creatine. Our good friend Angela asked, females taking creatine, is it good? Is it bad? Are there benefits?
So again, similar to my last response, different forms of creatine. I would just stick to creatine monohydrate. So again, creatine monohydrate has been shown to be very effective, very safe, and works in females as well. So I would just save your money and just buy creatine monohydrate.
Okay, fantastic. Creatine monohydrate just takes the award, number one.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Another great question from our good friend Annette. She asked, please ask Scott Forbes how he manages to be so cool and so savage at the same time. Scott, what is your secret, my man?
Oh boy, Annette.
Annette, hey, you're on here next. Hey, just to let you know, Annette, we're going to interview you next.
Yeah.
And we're going to expect some equally as tough questions because, hey, Scott keeps us cool. It's hard to be him. So savage, so cool. Let's get to the next question. We have one more question. Is that cool? You have time for one more?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay, awesome, man. Actually, we have two more. Is that cool?
Okay. Yeah.
You're like, just no more questions from Annette. Annette, you do not get to ask me more questions. Not today. Hold off on these questions. Okay. So Tim Fox asked, so here's the scenario question. He asked, I've been cutting down this past summer and pushing my meals back to about 7 p.m. Comes out to about 18 to 20 hour fasts. I was able to drop 4 inches on my waist in a month doing this, currently at 34, and roughly 12% body fat. However, due to my stomach shrinking, it's a lot harder to eat at that point in the day and therefore get enough protein in to support lean muscle. What do you suggest in helping to get in more protein to help support muscle mass and muscle maintenance throughout a diet?
Yeah, so obviously he can try it like a protein supplement or something like that. There's actually been some studies looking at protein pre-sleep. And so if you take for example, a 40-gram dose of protein just before you go to bed, when you're sleeping, that's when a lot of the adaptations and recovery process occurs. So you can actually get some good benefits with regards to increasing muscle and strength over time when you take protein just before bedtime. So just trying to consume protein maybe as a supplement and maybe some other form that makes it easier for him to consume that, like milk or something like that, could be a bedtime choice.
Yeah. Okay. And on that same note, Scott, I know you have a lot of knowledge with intermittent fasting and you know how proteins spread out throughout the day. If someone's main goal was fat loss with maximum muscle retention throughout a fat loss phase, would you suggest intermittent fasting for this person?
Yeah, so that's a not a straightforward answer for sure. Intermittent fasting can definitely be a strategy to lose weight, and especially if it fits your lifestyle and it's sustainable. That's the biggest thing. It works by cutting down your calories, just like any other diet, and so if it's sustainable and fits your lifestyle, intermittent fasting could be a very viable way to do that. The one issue is that, as you mentioned, they've shown that if you distribute your protein throughout the day, that seems to be the best way to maximize muscle growth and muscle mass. So obviously you can't do that if you're intermittent fasting. So I would just suggest that really taking care of when you do train, trying to train at the right time with regards to protein. So if you have, if you're going to eat at night, make sure that you eat some protein at night and maybe train at night. That might be the best time to do it. But obviously it's difficult, and it might not be the ideal diet to maximize muscle gains and trying to do weight loss at the same time.
Okay. Great response. I appreciate that. That's something definitely good to consider, especially with those long fasts and not even being able to maybe consume the amount of protein because of that shortened window. I appreciate the response, Scott. Thank you, man. So smart, dude.
Yeah. Thanks.
Hey, last question of the day. Guys, if you have questions, let us know. We'll wrap things up with this last question from Umar. Umar asks, suppose a person drinks black coffee for its ergogenic effect before a workout. What if the same person drinks milk coffee? How will milk affect the ergogenic effect of the coffee? I'll stop there. There's more, but I'll stop there.
Okay. To be honest, I don't know. I don't think it would have a major effect. So caffeine is the ergogenic ingredient, so the one that's going to enhance your exercise performance. And there's been a recent review that I think was published last year that looked at caffeine with resistance training and showed that caffeine could be a way to get stronger and bigger muscles, which is awesome because a lot of people drink coffee. But it works through a central mediated mechanism. So caffeine actually goes to your brain, and it's an adenosine receptor antagonist, which adenosine makes you feel sleepy, so it blocks that. And so then you feel more awake and you can do more reps and more volume and push yourself a little bit harder. So I don't think it would matter if you took your caffeine and straight black coffee, or if you had coffee with milk in it. I don't think it would make a difference on the ergogenic effects, but yeah, I'm not too sure.
Hey, that's a great response. So I personally don't know myself. I've always wondered that too. Like if I eat food, then like if I take caffeine, it would slow down the absorption of caffeine. But from what you said, it sounds like maybe there's some unknowns there, and could be individual as well.
Yeah.
Cool. So guys, hey, that was the last question, Scott. Thank you so much for your time. If there was this is a new question. Okay, this is a new question. If there were only 2 pieces of advice that you could give everyone that could help them maximize their rates of fat loss and muscle gain, what would those 2 pieces of advice be?
Okay, so one is you need to reduce your caloric intake. That's a must. So whatever means diet that works for you, that fits your lifestyle is really the one that's going to be the best. So whether it's intermittent fasting, whether it's I don't know, a low carb diet, a low fat diet, really whatever diet is going to be sustainable for you is going to be the one that's most beneficial over time. The second thing is that I recommend that people resistance train, because that's going to have a big impact on helping to maintain muscle, or might even help you grow muscle while you're losing weight, but could be really beneficial again during a caloric restriction. And I would add a third thing that's really important is consuming enough protein as well. So especially while you're trying to lose weight, consuming more protein is really beneficial, again, for helping you maintain muscle. And again, that McMaster group actually showed in a study 40% reduction in calories for a 4-week period. So they obviously cut down a lot of the food that they're eating. They lost weight. There was 2 groups. One group consumed a high protein diet, so they got 2.4 grams per kilogram per day. And another group got a lower protein intake. It was 1.2 grams per kilogram per day. And the group on the high protein actually gained muscle while losing weight and lost more fat mass than the group that was consuming a lower amount of protein.
How cool is that? Wow. So the power of protein.
Yeah. So cut your calories, resistance train, and eat protein. So I added a third, but sorry about that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you doing that. And you have a lot of knowledge. You have a lot of articles and great content, Scott. How can our audience follow you to keep learning more from you?
Probably the best is Instagram. So Scott_Forbes_PhD on Instagram. So you can find me there. I'm also on Twitter as well. So it's at ScottForbes14 on Twitter.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much, Scott. I'm a big fan of yours. I appreciate all your science-based content. And today, I just really appreciate your time answering all our members' questions and being just such a great resource to us. And I'd love to have you on in the future again, man. Thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to staying in touch with you.
Absolutely. Yeah, great to see you.
All right, man. Talk to you soon. Thank you again.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.